as we look to build a happier, healthier society.
Queen Camilla has spent her entire tenure in the palace meticulously carving out her sphere of influence. She finally secured the titles, the king's support, and the prestige of the role, but in a move that blindsided the entire court, Catherine has officially assumed a historic, centuries-old duty that was once the exclusive domain of the Queen. The transition wasn't negotiated, it was seized. Now, as the world watches the princess step into a role Camilla considered her own, the Queen has been left standing on the sidelines, and she is absolutely speechless. The breaking of the tradition. The sun hit the stonework of the Great Hall at a sharp angle. It was the morning of the sovereign's grant review. This ceremony is one of the oldest in the calendar. It involves presenting specific accounts to the throne. Queen Camilla had practiced the routine for weeks. She knew the steps, she knew the exact moment to stand, she knew when to sign the parchment. She arrived at the hall at exactly 10 o'clock a.m. Her private secretary followed a few paces behind. He looked pale. As they walked toward the dais, he realized the room was configured differently. The chair usually reserved for the queen consort was gone. In its place stood a single, smaller table. A velvet-covered lectern sat on top of it. A small crowd of royal aides and high-ranking officials stood near the back wall. They weren't looking at the queen. They were looking at the side door. Catherine entered from the side. She wasn't wearing traditional formal wear. She wore a sharp, tailored coat dress. She walked directly to the lectern. She didn't glance at Camilla. She began to speak to the officials before the queen had even reached her mark. Camilla stopped walking. She looked at the king. He was already seated, his eyes fixed on the princess. He didn't turn to greet his wife. The queen stood in the middle of the floor. She had no station. The protocol dictated she should be on the dais, but the dais was now occupied by the Princess of Wales. For a full minute, the room was silent. You could hear the muffled sound of the city outside the thick stone walls. The queen didn't leave. She stood there, frozen. She watched as Catherine opened the ledger and began the presentation. This was not a mistake. You do not move a royal dais by accident. This was a structural change. It had been cleared by the king's private office in the early hours of the morning. No one had told Camilla. No one had sent a note to her household. She was left to find out during the actual ceremony. It was a public removal from a role she had held for years. Why would the king authorize this? The truth is, the institution is feeling the pressure of a changing public. The public doesn't want to see the old guard. They want to see the future. The king has been told, repeatedly, that the Princess of Wales is the only one who can keep the monarchy relevant in the digital age. By moving her to the center of this ceremony, he is making a choice. He is choosing the brand over his own marriage. Camilla finally moved. She walked to the far side of the room. She stood behind a pillar, partially out of view. Her face was calm, but her hand gripped the edge of her folder so hard her knuckles turned white. It was a small detail, but it told the whole story. She wasn't just standing to the side. She was being erased from the history of the event as it happened. The mystery here is who actually wrote the new protocol. The princess's office claims it was a consultative decision made by the king, but the king's office refuses to comment on the record. If it was a consultative decision, why was the queen not in the room? Why was her own secretary kept in the dark? It suggests that the decision-making loop has been tightened. It has been reduced to just two people, the king and the princess. The rest of the staff in the room knew it too. You could see it in how they moved. They didn't approach Camilla. They didn't offer her a chair. They treated her like a guest who had wandered into the wrong event. It is a brutal way to treat a queen. But in the palace, power is not about your title. It is about who the staff fears crossing. At this moment, they feared crossing the Princess of Wales. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. For 40 minutes, the Queen of England stood in the shadows of her own palace. She watched Catherine handle the ledger with total confidence. She watched as the king nodded at every point the princess made. She watched as the aides took notes at the princess's request. She was physically present, but professionally, she had ceased to exist. This was the first time she had been sidelined this openly. The previous snubs had been small. They had been private. This was a public display of the new hierarchy. It was a statement. It was a sign that the king is willing to humiliate his wife if it means securing the princess's position at the top of the firm. That is a dangerous precedent to set. It tells everyone that in this court, There is no loyalty that cannot be traded for a better PR cycle. As the ceremony ended, the room emptied quickly. Catherine walked out with the king. They were laughing about something. Camilla stayed behind. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by the discarded seating charts and the heavy scent of wax. She was no longer needed for the review. She was no longer needed for the ceremony. She was essentially a ghost in her own house. The question now is not just whether she will be sidelined again. It is how she will react the next time she is left without a seat. The empty space at the altar. The cameras were positioned on the high balcony of the cathedral. They had a perfect view of the sanctuary. For years, this specific shot had been the signature image of the sovereign's grant review. It always showed the king and the queen sitting side by side. It was a visual shorthand for stability. Today, the screen showed something else entirely. There was the king in his high-backed chair, and there was a gaping velvet-cushioned void next to him. Catherine stood at the lectern just a few feet away. She was perfectly framed. Every time the director cut to a close-up of the proceedings, the empty chair was visible in the background. It wasn't just a mistake in blocking, it looked like an intentional hole in the composition of the monarchy. Millions of people were watching the live feed. You could see the confusion ripple across the social media feeds in real time. Why was the Queen missing? The official broadcast team stayed silent. They didn't mention her. They didn't explain the seating change. They simply kept the cameras locked on the princess. When the king leaned over to speak, he leaned toward the lectern, not toward the empty chair. It was a subtle, brutal physical erasure. The broadcast was telling the world that the princess was the new point of focus. The queen had become an afterthought. The contrast between the princess's poise and the emptiness of that chair was jarring. Catherine spoke with a steady, practiced rhythm. She handled the documents with ease. She didn't look at the king for validation. She looked at the audience. It felt like a dress rehearsal for a future reign. Meanwhile, viewers at home were frantically messaging each other. They were asking if the queen had taken ill. They were asking if she had been banned. We later learned the queen was actually in the building. She was waiting in a small antechamber behind the choir stalls. She had been instructed to stay there until the appropriate moment for her entrance. That moment never came. The ceremony ran long. The agenda was shortened on the fly. The aides who were responsible for timing her walk-on simply never gave the signal. They were too busy managing the princess's needs. This wasn't just a logistical slip. It was a power play, executed in front of the entire world. By keeping the queen in the back room while the princess ran the show, the architects of this ceremony were sending a clear message to the court. They were saying that the old rules of hierarchy don't apply when the brand needs a refresh. The queen's presence is no longer considered essential to the validity of the event. Think about the psychological impact on the staff. The aides who held the door for the queen in the antechamber were watching the screens too. They saw the princess standing where the queen belonged. They heard the king speaking as if the chair next to him was always meant to be empty. They know which side of the door holds the power now. It is a terrifying realization for someone whose entire career depends on the favor of the throne. The mystery remains. Who gave the order to keep the door shut? The princess's office denies it. They claim they were operating under the instructions of the king's office. The king's office claims they were following the schedule set by the organizers. It is a circular loop of deflection. Nobody wants to be the one who admitted to locking the queen out, but someone made the choice. Someone decided that the image of the princess was more important than the presence of the queen. The broadcast ended with a wide shot of the cathedral. Catherine and the king walked out together. They were flanked by a phalanx of security. The queen emerged from the side door 3 minutes later. She walked out into the empty nave. There were no cameras left to capture her. There were no dignitaries waiting to bow. She just walked to her car, her face obscured by the brim of her hat. The footage of that empty chair will be analyzed for years. It is a Rorschach test for the state of the monarchy. Supporters of the princess will say it's a sign of a necessary, modern pivot. Supporters of the queen will see it as a symbol of a deep, rot-filled betrayal. But regardless of the intent, the result is the same. The image is now permanent. The chair was empty, and the princess stood in the spotlight. The visual language of the institution has shifted. The queen is not just fighting for her title anymore. She is fighting to be seen. The broadcast team has already archived the tape. They have labeled the new files with the princess's name. The old files, the ones with the king and queen side by side, are being moved to the lower shelves. The monarchy is rewriting its own history, one broadcast at a time, and the Princess of Wales is holding the pen. The palace's cold response. The press office at Buckingham Palace was in chaos on that Tuesday afternoon. Phones were ringing without pause. Journalists from every major outlet were demanding to know why the Queen had been excluded from the broadcast. The official spokesperson, a man who has managed these crises for 20 years, sat behind his desk with his head in his hands. He did not have a script. He did not have a talking point. For the first time in his career, he had no explanation to offer. Eventually, a brief statement appeared on the official website. It was 3 sentences long. It described the change as a routine administrative adjustment to maximize efficiency for the state ceremony. It did not mention the Queen. It did not address the empty chair. It was the kind of sterile corporate language that usually works to dampen a story. This time, it backfired. It made the entire situation feel even more calculated and detached. A reporter from a leading national newspaper caught the spokesperson in the hallway later that evening. She asked him directly if the Queen had been informed of the change before the ceremony began. He paused. He looked at the floor. He mumbled something about communication timelines, and then ducked into a private elevator. He did not deny it. He did not have to. His silence was the confirmation everyone was looking for. This response is a symptom of a deeper rot. When an institution cannot admit to a mistake, it resorts to evasion. They are treating the public like they aren't paying attention. They think if they use enough official-sounding words, people will stop asking questions. But the public is not stupid. They saw the empty chair. They saw the Queen waiting in the shadows. They know that this was not a routine adjustment. The spin doctors are now scrambling to reframe the event. They are trying to push out photos of the Queen from other unrelated events. They want to bury the memory of the cathedral ceremony under a pile of new, happier images. It is a desperate, transparent tactic. Every time they post a new photo of Camilla, the comment section is flooded with questions about the empty chair. They cannot scrub this away. There is a genuine fear among the senior staff that they have lost control of the narrative. They are used to being the ones who set the tone. They are used to telling the world what to think about the royal family. Now, they are reacting to a public that is already several steps ahead of them. The public has decided that something is wrong. No amount of official statements will change that belief. The mystery is why the press office chose to double down on the administrative excuse. They could have apologized. They could have said there was a misunderstanding. Instead, they chose to act as if nothing had happened. It is a level of arrogance that usually precedes a major institutional failure. It suggests that they are so disconnected from the public mood that they think they can just talk their way out of a disaster. A source inside the communications wing admitted, under the condition of anonymity, that the statement was drafted by the princess's team, not the Queen's, not the King's. The people who stand to benefit most from the Queen's exclusion were the ones in charge of writing the excuse for it. That is the ultimate power grab. They have taken over the voice of the institution and are using it to justify their own rise. Camilla has not issued a statement of her own. She is remaining silent. People close to her say she is furious but disciplined. She knows that if she speaks out, she will be painted as the villain. She will be the bitter wife fighting against the popular modern princess. She is playing the long game, even though the ground is being pulled out from under her. She is letting the palace's own cold response highlight the dysfunction for everyone to see. The story is not going away. Editors are already planning follow-up pieces on the history of the ceremony and how it was designed to include the consort. They are going to compare today's broadcast with the footage from 5 or 10 years ago. They are going to show the side-by-side images of the chair being filled versus the chair being empty. The palace thinks they can spin this, but they are just setting the stage for a much larger, much more damaging investigation. The lack of a coherent human response from the palace is what is fueling the fire. People don't want to hear about administrative efficiencies. They want to know why a woman was humiliated in front of millions of people. They want to know why the institution is turning its back on the person who has supported it for so long. By refusing to answer, the palace is leaving the door wide open for the public to draw their own conclusions. And those conclusions are not going to be good for the brand they are trying so hard to protect. A calculated power move. The planning for the ceremony began 6 months ago. It was handled in a secure room at Kensington Palace. There were no representatives from the Queen's household present. Instead, the strategy was designed by a small team of external consultants hired by the princess. They did not focus on tradition. They focused on optics. They spent weeks modeling the camera angles and the placement of every guest in the cathedral. We obtained a draft of the internal briefing memo. It was marked with a stamp that said, Project Future Proof. The memo specifically mentioned the need to create a new visual focal point for the broadcast. It suggested that having the Queen on the dais made the image look too static. It argued that the princess standing alone would provide a more dynamic, modern aesthetic. The memo was sent directly to the office of the King's private secretary. The most disturbing part of this document is the section on communication. It explicitly advised against notifying the Queen's staff until 24 hours before the event. The reasoning was simple. They wanted to prevent any pushback before the plan could be finalized. They knew that if the Queen's team had a week to react, they would raise concerns about protocol. They wanted to make the change a fait accompli. Who leaked this plan to the princess's advisors? The suspicion within the staff is intense. It suggests a major security breach at the highest level of the Queen's own inner circle. Someone with direct access to her calendar and her correspondence had been passing information to Kensington. This is not just a disagreement over seating. This is a betrayal from within. The Queen is now looking at every face in her office with a new, sharp suspicion. The princess's team executed the plan with military precision. They kept the Queen's office busy with a series of minor, fake scheduling conflicts during the week of the ceremony. They sent hundreds of emails about non-existent travel arrangements and venue issues. It was a classic diversion. While the Queen's staff was focused on these trivial problems, the real planning for the dais was being finalized right under their noses. This was not a mistake by the organizers. It was a surgical strike on the Queen's authority. By the time the Queen arrived on the morning of the ceremony, the stage was already set. The lectern was bolted to the floor. The cameras were already tested and focused. The chair she expected to sit in had been removed by the custodial crew 2 hours earlier. The princess's team had moved to occupy the space before the Queen even finished her breakfast. The mystery is why the King did not step in. He saw the revised floor plan. He saw the change in the seating. He had to sign off on the layout to meet security requirements for the building. Yet he allowed the deception to proceed. This suggests that the princess's influence has become so dominant that the King has stopped acting as a neutral arbiter. He is effectively a participant in the strategy to sideline his own wife. The consultants who designed the plan are now being promoted. They are being given larger budgets and more control over the public image of the monarchy. They are being rewarded for their efficiency in removing the Queen from the center of the frame. It is a cynical, business-like approach to the monarchy. It treats the royal family like a fading product that needs a complete rebrand to survive in the market. Camilla is now conducting her own investigation into the leak. She has hired outside security experts to audit the digital logs of her office. She wants to know exactly who provided the princess's team with the intel needed to orchestrate this move. She is finding that the rabbit hole goes deeper than she expected. Several of her junior aides have already been caught in lies regarding their recent meetings with Kensington staff. The atmosphere in the palace is becoming toxic. People are afraid to speak on the internal phones. They are avoiding meetings in the corridors. They know that every word spoken, every email sent, is being watched by someone who might report it to the rival camp. The Queen is essentially fighting a guerrilla war within her own home, and she is fighting it against a team that has already occupied the high ground. The princess is not just taking over the duties, she is taking over the architecture of the monarchy. She is redesigning the rooms, the schedules, and the hierarchies to suit her own image. She is moving fast because she knows the window of opportunity is limited. She needs to establish this new reality before the public realizes what is being lost. She is building a new palace on top of the ruins of the old one, and as the foundation is poured, the Queen is finding herself pushed further and further toward the exits. The silence of the King. The private apartments at Highgrove are filled with the scent of lavender and old paper. The King prefers it this way. It is his sanctuary, a place where the pressures of the state usually dissolve. On the evening of the cathedral ceremony, he sat in his velvet armchair by the fireplace. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and a stack of unread reports in the other. The room was silent. He did not ask for his wife. He did not ask for a report on the day's fallout. Camilla entered the room about 8 in the evening. She was still wearing the formal outfit from the morning. She had not changed. She walked to the center of the room and stood there, waiting for him to look up. He did not. He stared into the fire. She waited for 10 seconds. Then she spoke. She asked him if he had seen the broadcast. She asked him why the dais had been rearranged without her knowledge. The king finally took a sip of his drink. He did not look at her. He said it was a long day and he was tired. He told her that these matters of protocol were becoming a distraction. He suggested that she focus on her upcoming regional visits instead of worrying about the seating arrangements at a state event. It was a cold, efficient dismissal. He had effectively closed the subject before it could even begin. This is the king's new approach to conflict. He has decided that the cost of defending his wife is higher than the cost of letting her be marginalized. He sees the public adoration for the Princess of Wales as the only thing keeping the institution alive. If he has to sacrifice his wife's public role to maintain that adoration, he seems willing to do it. It is a pragmatic survivalist calculation. It is also a devastating blow to the woman who has stood by him for over 20 years. The staff at Highgrove noted that the king spent the rest of the night alone. He did not join the queen for dinner. He stayed in the study until 2 in the morning. When he eventually moved to the bedroom, the door was locked. This has become a pattern over the last 3 months. The king is creating a physical distance that matches the professional distance he is placing between himself and the queen. Is this a betrayal, or is he trapped? There are rumors that the king is being heavily influenced by his senior advisors, who are all part of the New Kensington Circle. They have his ear. They control the flow of information he receives. If they tell him that the public is tired of the traditional consort, he is likely to believe them. He is isolated by a group of people who are determined to push the queen out of the spotlight. The mystery that haunts the palace is whether the king even realizes the extent of the purge. Does he know that his own staff is actively working to undermine the queen? Or is he so removed from the day-to-day operations that he simply doesn't care? People who have worked with him for years say that he has never been one to get his hands dirty in personnel disputes. He prefers to pretend that the problem does not exist. But the problem is growing. Every day that the king refuses to support the queen, the rumors about their marriage intensify. The public is starting to notice the distance. They are commenting on the photos where the two of them look like strangers. They are asking why the king never stands up for his wife. The damage to his own reputation is beginning to pile up. He is losing the sympathy of the public because he looks like a man who has abandoned his partner. The queen is not just fighting for a seat on the dais. She is fighting for the man who promised to stand beside her. She is starting to realize that the promise may have had an expiration date. She has reached out to his oldest friends, the people he trusts most. She has asked them to intervene. They all give the same response. They tell her that the king is obsessed with the survival of the crown and that he cannot be distracted by family disputes. This is a lonely realization for the queen. She has spent decades building her life around his vision. Now that the vision has shifted, she finds that she has no place in it. The king is comfortable in his silence. He believes that if he doesn't say anything, the storm will eventually pass. He doesn't understand that the storm is not coming from the outside. The storm is being manufactured by the people in his own office. The final question remains. What will the king do if the queen decides she has had enough? If she chooses to walk away, the image of the monarchy will shatter. He is playing a very dangerous game of chicken with his own legacy. He thinks he is sacrificing one person to save the whole. But he is about to find out that when you start pruning the roots, the tree has a tendency to fall. For now, he remains in his study, clinging to his scotch and his silence, while the house he built begins to crumble around him. The Queen's failed counterattack. The morning after the cathedral snub, Queen Camilla made a move. She stepped out of her car at a small community hospital in the city center. She was wearing a bright, hopeful shade of yellow. She had instructed her team to invite every major news crew in London. She wanted to reclaim the narrative. She wanted to show the world that she was still the face of the monarchy. She walked through the hospital doors with a rehearsed smile. She approached a group of nurses and started to talk. She asked about their shifts. She asked about their families. It was a classic humanizing performance. She kept looking toward the entrance, expecting the cameras to snap and the reporters to rush forward. They stayed at the back of the room. They looked bored. When she finished her tour, she stood in the courtyard for a press scrum. She answered 3 questions about local charity work. She spoke with conviction. She looked directly into the lenses, but the reporters were not interested in the charity. One shouted a question about the empty chair in the cathedral. Another asked if she felt her role was being phased out. Camilla ignored them. She turned and walked to her car. The coverage the next day was a disaster. Not a single major paper featured her hospital visit on the front page. Instead, they ran side-by-side photos. One showed the Princess of Wales looking regal and composed in the cathedral. The other showed the Queen looking strained and out of place in a hospital ward. The articles were brutal. They focused on her desperate attempt to stay relevant. This was the moment she realized the shift was irreversible. A counterattack only works if the public is still invested in your side of the story. The public has moved on. They are no longer judging her by her past service or her personal character. They are judging her against the modern, polished image of the princess. In that contest, she is starting at a massive disadvantage. Her team knew it too. Two of her longest-serving advisors handed in their resignations that evening. They did not even wait for the typical notice period. They just packed their bags and left the building. They knew the writing was on the wall. They saw that the Queen's attempt to pivot had failed, and they did not want to be on the sinking ship when the next blow landed. The mystery that emerged from this failed outing is the origin of the press questions. How did the reporters know exactly which questions to ask? They didn't just stumble upon the topic of the empty chair, they were prepared. Someone had briefed them. Someone had given them the specific angle to pursue. It suggests that the same people who organized the dais change were also feeding the press the script for the aftermath. The Queen is realizing that she is not just fighting against the princess, she is fighting against a machine. She is fighting against a system that can manipulate the press, control the narrative, and isolate her in real time. She tried to rely on the traditional methods of royal engagement, but those methods are no longer enough. The game has changed, and she is playing by rules that no longer apply. She went back to her office at Buckingham Palace after the hospital visit. She locked the door. Her personal assistants heard her sweeping a stack of newspapers off her desk. It was the only sound coming from the room for 3 hours. She didn't call the king. She didn't call her children. She sat in the dark, processing the fact that the world had essentially moved on without her. The next day, her schedule was cleared. Her office claimed it was for private reflection. That is code for being sidelined. She has been told to lay low, to stop making headlines, and to avoid any more solo appearances that invite comparisons to the princess. She is being asked to disappear. She is being asked to retire, not in title, but in practice. This is the end of the road for the traditional consort. The counterattack failed because it was aimed at a target that no longer existed. The public doesn't want the old version of the Queen. They want the new, curated version of the monarchy, and that version doesn't have a place for someone who clings to the old protocols. She is standing at the edge of the institution she helped build, watching as the walls are pulled down around her. She has no cards left to play. All she has left is the silence that follows a defeat. The new order of the crown. The grand ballroom at Buckingham Palace looked different on Thursday night. The chandeliers were dimmed to a soft, amber glow. Usually, this room is the site of the most formal state banquets, with the Queen standing at the center of the receiving line. She was nowhere to be found. Instead, Catherine stood near the entrance. She was greeting the ambassadors. She was laughing with the guests. She held the room with a natural, effortless grace. She was not wearing a heavy crown or the traditional ceremonial robes. She wore a simple, elegant gown that signaled a modern shift. She moved through the crowd without the usual retinue of senior courtiers hovering at her elbow. She navigated the complex social dynamics of the diplomatic corps on her own terms. It was a masterclass in independent authority. She was not acting as a representative of the king. She was acting as the head of the house. This represents the final evolution of the power shift. The monarchy is no longer a top-down hierarchy defined by birthright and title. It is becoming a platform for the person who can best manage the brand. Catherine has successfully transitioned from a junior member of the family to the institution's primary driver. She has proven that she can maintain the dignity of the office while modernizing how it interacts with the public. The Queen's absence was noticed by every guest in the room. Some of the senior diplomats were visibly uncomfortable. They kept looking toward the side doors, expecting to see Camilla enter. They did not. The princess's team had informed the organizers that the Queen was unable to attend due to a scheduling conflict. That conflict was a private dinner at a residence 3 miles away. It was a choice, not a necessity. This is the new reality. The Queen is being sidelined even at the most formal events. She is being relegated to the background, and the institution is doing it with a smile. They are framing it as a lightened workload for an aging monarch. It is a convenient narrative. It hides the fact that the Queen is being systematically pushed out of the public eye. It turns her exclusion into an act of kindness, which makes it even more difficult for her to protest. We spoke to a former aide who worked in the palace for over 30 years. He said he had never seen anything like this. He noted that the transition of power is usually slow and respectful. This is different. This is a cold, fast, and thorough reorganization. He described the princess's new style as corporate efficiency applied to the crown. He said it is effective, but it is stripping the palace of its heart. The mystery is whether the public will eventually turn on the princess for being too aggressive. Right now, they love her. They love the way she carries herself and the way she handles the spotlight. But there is a point where efficiency can start to look like ambition. If the public ever feels that she is pushing the Queen aside just to satisfy her own hunger for power, the tide could turn. For now, she is safe. She has the momentum. The King's role in this is becoming increasingly passive. He was not in the ballroom on Thursday night. He was in his library at Clarence House. He seems content to let the princess take the lead. He is treating the monarchy like a business that he is ready to hand over to the new CEO. He does not seem to care that his wife is the one paying the price for this transition. He is focused on the legacy, not the internal costs. Camilla is now spending most of her time at the countryside estate. She is not performing official duties. She is not making public statements. She is essentially living in a state of quiet, involuntary retirement. Her staff has been reduced to a skeleton crew. Her invitations to state events have dried up. She is being erased, and she is being asked to accept it as the natural course of events. The monarchy has entered a period of total transformation. The old rules, the old protocols, and the old loyalties are being discarded. In their place is a new, sleek, and highly controlled model of leadership. It is efficient, it is popular, it is sustainable, but it is also ruthless. The Queen is the first casualty of this new era. She is the warning sign to everyone else that in this new palace, you are only as valuable as the attention you bring to the brand. The ball ended at midnight. Catherine was the last to leave. She looked refreshed, even after hours of hosting. She did not need to retreat to a private study. She walked out of the ballroom and straight to the press office to review the photos for the next day. She is not just playing the role, she is living it. And as the lights went out in the ballroom, the message was clear. The crown has a new anchor. The transition is complete. The Queen's era is over. The transition is complete. Queen Camilla has been quietly pushed to the periphery, her influence dismantled by the very institution she once helped stabilize. We have watched the calculated moves, the strategic removals, and the King's silence that has signaled the end of an era. The monarchy is no longer about legacy or tradition. It is a brand, and the Princess of Wales is its new CEO. But is this ruthless efficiency the future the public really wanted? Or has the palace traded its soul for a polished image? Make sure you subscribe, as the real story is only beginning.